honor and a privilege for me to share a few thoughts with you this morning. The prayer that Colette said he joined in was very striking because she expressed in the prayer a petition to the Lord to change our lives, to bring about change in our lives. And I think this is very much a key point in our faith, that we are a group of people through our faith who are continually in a process of growth, continually in a process of change, in order to be fuller human beings, in order to be men and women who are increasingly loving, merciful, peacemaking, an example, a witness, wise as we get older, people with the capacity to lead and lead through example, not just through mere words. We live in a time when words are kind of cheap, and people don't honor their words or promises. So this is a wonderful thing about a Christian community. And you people that are gathered here this morning are particularly important because you have brought about significant change in your own lives. You are on a journey that started maybe for some in the recent past, maybe for others in a more distant past. But in some very clear way, you were a group of people, of Catholics, that probably broke with your previous existence and opened up a new horizon in your lives to walk with a new awareness in relation to the world that we live in, the problems that are presented in the world, and to be part of a wider community trying in the name of the Lord to bring about life in the world. We Catholics, we Christians, are people of the resurrection. We just don't believe or tolerate death. Okay, we're all going to physically die, we know that. I had a little stroll around this beautiful church in the sunshine this morning, and I actually almost enjoyed looking at the gravestones, the headstones, and reading some of the names. And I don't want to be morbid and say a graveyard is a nice place to be, but it brought to mind that these are the people, or the people who have gone before us, the witnesses and the predecessors in the faith, and in a deeply contemplative way, those people are enjoying the fullness of life. Those people have, through their time, have done wonderful things. They've struggled against the forces of evil and of death, the same way that this is our time. And you and I must also go at some stage, but we leave a legacy of life to grow into a more fuller life. The promise of the Lord is that we will not die. Nobody has come back from heaven. But the only thing we're sure of is that life is a fuller, more beautiful expression of love. And that's how we're going to live forever. Every one of us has had a defining moment in our life. A life-changing moment. For some, it may have been an experience when we were at school, when we were at college. For others, it may be an experience about meeting somebody important that helped us to find ourselves, as we say, and to change. For others, it may have been the moment or the time that you met your life's partner. It may have been the moment as well that you graduated from college. Yeah. And all these things mean that we find our way in life. And we find our way in life with more strength, more commitment, with a more capacity to keep on the journey and to do things better. So to be associated with CAFOD is a Catholic experience that's at the center of our faith. It's not something that's marginal or an appendix or something that's tagged on, because you are the people that are living at its fullest the central message of Jesus of Nazareth, which is to love creation, love the world. And particularly in a situation where love and people and the world are being threatened, where lots of things are happening in the world of today that are forces of darkness and forces of evil and forces of destruction that destroy life. Personally, as Sarah told you in the beginning, I am coming from the south, the southern hemisphere. I have spent the last over 50 years working as a missionary in Peru, in Latin America, also a time in Brazil and in Colombia. So maybe things that I have done and seen are slightly different than yours, but ultimately they're the same. I'd like to share with you one or two little stories that affected me and helped me to, in some way probably painfully, see the light, and also experiences that were foundational for me to be able to grow as a human being and as a person. I remember one day when I was in my late 20s, and I had been ordained priest a number of years at the time. Actually, I was officially a parish priest, although that in the South doesn't mean a person with a great title or anything like that. It's just you're given an area and you just say, do it. That's it. Yeah. Everything is new. And in my case, the area that was assigned to me was the old rubbish dump of the capital city of Peru, in Lima. And it was quite horrible, really. Before I arrived, it was a place where they used to keep pigs. And between the rubbish and the pigs, it wasn't the place to go on your holidays. Anyway, in the 60s, the whole southern world, what we used to call the third world in those days, African countries, Latin American countries, what was happening at that particular stage in a very intensive way was the flight from the land, from a rural subsistence type of existence, where families were getting bigger and bigger, the possibility of access to land was lesser and lesser, and people felt obliged to keep body and soul together, as we say, to go to the big city in order to have some sort of hope of survival. On arrival at the city, people were desperate because there was no help from governments or the state. So people had to live literally on their wits, try and get together, organise, and invade a piece of wasteland. In this case, nobody was too worried about a rubbish one, if you wanted to live on top of that. The Gospel says if you want to build a house, you build it on solid ground. If you don't, the house will fall down. Well, all the little houses in the place that I lived are still rickety. Yeah, lots of them are falling down, and particularly when any earth movement, it's a seismic area prone to earthquakes, and there's always little shivers and shakes and stuff like that. So it's like living in a place where the houses are something like drunken sailors. In the beginning, the houses are made of bamboo huts, and they're quite small and precarious, and in the winter time cold, but that's survival. People have to struggle from the beginning to get water, light, sewerage, and they do it themselves. There's nobody there to help. They have to get together, organise themselves, and do it. And that's the life of the church. The priest's life is that. To get to know the people, to join with them, to get to know their names, to win their confidence, to work together, to give example. The people help us to see through a lot of things that are superficial and extra in our lives, and to get to the essentials. Like any priest, I went through the long period of study, formation, all the stuff that you read in books and everything like that. I was listening and hearing about God and the Bible for many years. And when I went to work in Via Maria, that was the name of the place, I felt that what I had learned and what I had to say was pretty useless. I felt that I was in a different world completely from what I had been trained for. And it wasn't a nice experience. Yeah. If you can imagine yourselves, like, if you spend years being trained to do something, you have a right to feel confident to be able to do it. And one day, it was very warm, it was very hot. And I was coming back to my little house. And I remember a young woman, a lady of about maybe 25 years of age or so. And she was dressed with typical Andean peasant clothes. And she had two small children. And she was extremely poor, like everybody in the place. And poorly dressed, her children the same way. And she had a shawl, we call it a manta, on her shoulder, on her back, to carry things. And sometimes people come from the market, carry the things that they buy in the marketplace to their house in the shawl, in the manta. But in her case, as is the custom as well, it's where women carry small babies. And when she saw me, she recognized me and she said, "You're the priest." I said, "Yeah." And she said, in a very pleading and delicate way, very respectful way, she said, "Padre, I would be really, really happy if you would baptize, christen my baby." And I said, "I certainly will do that." And she said, "My baby is ill, so it's very important for me that the child be baptized." It was a little baby girl. And when she took down the manta and produced the child, I knew by the expression on the child's face that she didn't have long to live. I don't know if many of you have ever seen the pallor of a child's face that's close to death. It's a very frightening experience. And in this particular case, I was at the stage where, unfortunately, I began to know and to experience those sort of situations. Anyway, we got a few people around, we got a little water, and we stood around. You know, we didn't go to any church or anything like that. And together we said the Our Father, the Lord's Prayer, and we christened, we baptized the child. Very simply. No lights, no candles, no sponsors, none of that. Very simple emergency baptism. And straight away there were two reactions. One was from the mother, her name was Julia, and the other was mine. She incredibly had a mixture of sadness because of the situation of her child going to die. And she knew that. She was no fool. But she seemed extremely kind of pleased about the baptism. And I was all mixed up. I felt that something was terribly wrong. That I, as a representative of God and the church, baptizing a child that was about to die, I knew that that child was going to die because of hunger. Because the father had vanished, disappeared, never took on responsibility. Here was a woman with 3 small kids, hungry, undernourished, and unable to feed her children. And still she was taught or trained or was belonging to a culture where she felt that it was necessary for the child to be baptized. But I felt I was talking about a God that was closer to death than life. And I had a horrible, wrenching feeling in my gut. Because I know that God's will, or the only God that we believe in, the God of the Bible, is a God of love, and a God of life, not a God of death. If we're talking about a God of death, it's not the real God. It's false. It's a lie. So, the conclusion is to genuinely baptize kids, to christen children, means that we've got to change a situation where people have to live, not die before their time. So it meant that to follow Jesus and to be believers in the Lord, we had to together, pool together, and create a situation of change, and never, never allow a situation like that to continue. So that was a real lesson for me. It wasn't about books, it wasn't about preaching, it wasn't about all those wonderful things that priests used to do and still do. It was about trying to look at people and a situation honestly in the eyes and ask yourself deep down, what does God, the God of life and love, want us to do in this situation? I remember another occasion, I'm not going to delay much longer in this, where a young fellow, he was about maybe in his mid-20s, came along one night and he told me, he was a fellow that didn't go to church or anything like that. Church was a really small thing. And he was a member of a local Marxist group at the time. And they were doing good things. And there was a mixed group. Some people were believers, other people weren't. But the important thing was that they were trying to do good things for all of the people. At that stage, they were trying to install a water supply with the little bit of help that they could give to one another and pool one together, doing activities and stuff like that. Anyway, he came along one night and he said, "Padre, my wife has died." And I knew the woman, a young woman like himself. He said, "Would you be kind enough to come with me to the house, to the wake?" I said, "Yeah, sure." I sympathized with him, said kind words, the best I could. And one speaks at a time like that, words are not sufficient, everybody feels, it's just a question maybe of presence and accompanying people more than what you say. But when we were walking through the night, through dark little streets, coming close to his house, where his wife's remains were being waked with the neighbours, he stopped me in my tracks and he says, "I want to ask you a favour." He said, "When we go in by the coffin, would you please not say that my wife's death is the will of God?" And I said, "I absolutely guarantee you I will do that, because I don't believe it's the will of God." That woman died of tuberculosis. She died of hunger. When we talk about sickness and illness, particularly the social diseases, things like TB, cholera, yellow fever, these are diseases that are very common. Malaria in the south, different forms of it. And they're the technical medical words, scientific words for different types of diseases. These diseases have one root. They are founded in poverty. And poverty is a terrible thing. It's very complex. It's not easy to talk about. There are many different versions about it. There are many different theories about it. Yeah? But we as believers have learned to say things as they are. And the church didn't always do this. But for the last 50 years in the church in Latin America, and now particularly with Pope Francis, because Pope Francis, as you know, comes from Latin America. And he, at every opportunity that he gets, he says, we live in a world that has to change, because the dominant type of development, of economic development that rules the world at this point is useless, because too many people are lost, too many people haven't access to life. And that's why the Pope says in very clear words, poverty kills. The economy that we have at the moment in the world, the dominant economy, the globalization, is an economy that destroys people. The biggest cause of death in the world is poverty. And poverty means selfishness. It means that wealth, productivity is not equally or justly distributed. And this is where you come in. You people who have been supporters of CAFOD and who have been involved in the work of CAFOD, sharing your own generosity, coming together, organizing, participating in campaigns, petitions, both within the church and in relation to political action. You're trying to change the world in the name of your faith. And this is the best possible thing you could do. Because you believe in Jesus of Nazareth, because you believe in the resurrection, because you believe in the gift of life, because you believe that life is a gift that we have to share and not be selfish about it. It's not all about me, my life. Life is lived to the full when we can look the other person in the eye and say, you are my brother, you are my sister. We may not be blood brothers, we may not be blood sisters, but faith brings a new way of thinking, a new way of looking at things, and particularly a new way of action. The Bible begins with the story about Cain and Abel, yeah? And that story ends on a very frightening and tragic note when one brother kills another brother, yeah? Even though the bond of immediate family is there, that bond is destroyed. That's the great myth, one of the great founding myths of our faith. The stark reality that what can happen to people is that we can destroy one another, and that this relationship of immediate family can be destroyed. And the Bible story ends with Jesus of Nazareth telling another story, or many other stories, but one particular one that's probably particularly well known is what we call the story of the Samaritan, where an individual is robbed and is thrown on the side of the road. And the text says he's close to death. Yeah? He's been robbed, he's been beaten up. Yeah? A couple of people pass by, and they're very important in the context of the time. One is a clergyman, a person that knows the law, a person with an official responsibility of the culture at the time, and a person that has religious identity and responsibility. So he passes by. He doesn't feel in any way obliged to even look at the dying person on the side of the road. He may be selfish, I don't know. But whatever about him was that he didn't feel any kind of inkling of responsibility or anything to do with somebody that was dying. Just go ahead. And the second was much the same, a Levite. The third was an interesting person, a Samaritan. A Samaritan was a stranger and an enemy, and a person of a different faith at the time. And the Samaritans were detested by the Jews because there was a recent war, and what very often tragically happens in war, Jewish women were abused by Samaritan troops. And this leaves a terrible, terrible mentality that does not easily get cured for generations and generations. So the enmity, the animosity between Jews and Samaritans was total. And particularly when the Jews feel that these people have nothing got to do with what they call the true God. And still, the Samaritan was the only fellow that said, I have compassion for this dying man. He felt in his entrañas, is the word in Greek that's used in the New Testament. He felt something moving in his flesh. Yeah? The entrañas is something equivalent to the womb, to the inner self where life begins. And that's where compassion biblically begins. And the movement of compassion obliges him to get down off his horse, lift him up, try and do the best he could to stop the bleeding, bring him along to a local hospice, give some money to the guy that was running the thing, and he says, if he hasn't got better by tomorrow, I'll be back and I'll give you more. And Jesus said to the people around him, which of those three people was the neighbor? And they said the Samaritan. So the Samaritan became a brother to the dying man. Okay? The Samaritan was not a blood brother. It wasn't like Cain and Abel. So what Jesus was about is making people who are enemies, where walls and barriers exist between them, breaking down the walls, breaking down everything, so to create a new relationship, to create a new bonding so that people can be brothers and sisters and look after one another. That's what Christian love is about. Yeah. And that's what CAFOD is about, and that's what we're all about. So this is the beginning of CAFOD, and it goes on to this day because, unfortunately, we haven't yet learned to look after one another properly. The Pope also tells us that we have to be aware as well that the world that we live in, the planet that we inhabit, is also in danger of being destroyed. And the destruction of the planet has to do with the way our economy is organized, and has been organized for the last 200 years. The dominant thing of the way political activity, supporting economic development, it doesn't take into account the destructive elements in the way that our civilization is, that is destructive to the world. To depend on energy based on fossil fuels is no longer sustainable. It's under question. That's what the agreement in Paris was about 2 years ago. You people here in Britain are one of the first countries, if not the first, to pass legislation against the advancement of climate change. And that's a wonderful thing, and it's important that you people recognize this and the leadership that you're giving as a nation in this particular area. Now, as we said before, the economy kills. So there's, up to this, we talked about two crises. The crisis that's social and economic, and whose principal victims are the poor. We talk about another crisis that's environmental, ecological, and what suffers is the planet, the earth, the trees. Yeah? The Pope says very clearly in Laudato Si, his famous encyclical that he brought out 2 years ago. And he says there's not two crises. That was our way of talking. But that's no longer a way to look at it and to talk about it. He said instead of two crises, there's only one. There's two aspects, but there's only one crisis in the world of today, which is both socially and economic on the one hand, and ecological on the other hand. Those two elements have to be understood as put together, as integrated. The two of them are united in practice, right? So we must try and think, making a mental effort, and it's not easy because our thought patterns, our culture, and everything like this doesn't help us in this area. So there's a learning process and a challenge to kind of re-educate ourselves in a new way and in a different way, and it's countercultural. It's against what we see in the television, it's against what we come up with in the media, in the normal run of events. It's interesting that to be a real Christian, we're going against the current, because right now, what's important, the major value, is the accumulation of wealth, money, power. Oxfam International brings out a statement every year, a financial statement about the way power is organized in the world. And this year, 2017, they come up with a frightening statistic that 50% of the world's wealth, 50% of the production of the world is in the hands of only 8 individuals. Just imagine that, it's mind-blowing. 50%. And the other 50% has to be shared between 7 billion people. The distance is greater and greater between people and the possibility of sharing, not just fighting for a part of the cake. So Francis talks about care of creation. He makes us understand that everything is connected, that everything is interdependent, that we are part of nature, that no person or no part of nature can exist and can grow without a relationship of harmony with one another. This is something that the West lost hundreds of years ago at the beginning of this period of modernity, when we began to make scientific discoveries, which in themselves are wonderful, but which became more and more removed and aggressive towards nature and the natural order. That's why we talk about the progress of science and the conquest of nature. That's military language. Now the planet is suffering, it has called us to task, and we must make friends with nature. We must have a friendly relationship of harmony with nature if we're going to give the possibility of a decent life to children, to grandchildren, to the generations that come after us. And this is the most wonderful moment. In the midst of all the crisis, at least we're beginning to have a clearer and a more important vision of the world that we live in relation to the goodness of God, who is pure love and concerned with the future of the planet and everybody who lives in it. I would like to end by telling you a little, in the time that's available to us, how we in Latin America are involved in a particular task that we think is our responsibility, and we were wanting to make our contribution. It's in relation to the defense of the Amazon. You know? Does anybody know about the lights? Great. That's good. Yeah. There are 2 major river basins in the world that are extremely important. There are more. 2 of them are more important than others. Yeah? One is the Amazons in South America. The other one is the Congo in Africa. Now there you have before you a slide. And the idea is, what do you see on the slide? What? I don't see any lungs there. Trees. Good. There are trees put together in a drawing to make lungs, to make you see the lungs. There's the one on the left, there's the one on the right. You okay? And in number 29 of Laudato Si, Pope Francis says, the Amazon and the Congo are the lungs of the world. He uses metaphoric language. Yeah. Obviously, lungs are in our chest, yeah, human beings and in animals. But he transfers the meaning or the imagery of lungs to the environment and to this stage to these great river basins. And what we see before us is that 20%, this area here, of the Amazon and of the Congo is now destroyed. And it's destroyed not by anything that has to do with nature, but it's been destroyed by human beings and by our activity. What the destruction of the rainforest in the Amazon, we're talking about the Amazon, has serious effects on climate. It's the biggest single issue that's bringing about climate change. Why? Because it reduces the amount of drinking water that the population of the world has to consume. And it reduces the amount of oxygen in the air. Not just for the people in the Amazon in Latin America, but in the whole of the planet. Yeah. Right now, if you can imagine, if we had 5 full glasses of water on the table, yeah, that's the amount of water, figuratively speaking, that the human family needs. But if we destroy the Amazon, we're only going to have 4 glasses of water instead of 5 to share between a bigger, constantly growing world population. We're going to have to use 20% less water than we have now. In the same way, every time we take a breath of air, when we inhale oxygen into our lungs, absolutely essential for life, for every 5 breaths that the world needs, if we continue to destroy the Amazon, we're only going to have 4 breaths to share amongst the whole world's population. So this is a matter of life and death. And we're not just talking about ecology out there. We're talking that this has religious sense. In the same way as we say that the way we have organized the economy is destructive, we have to realize that the same way of model of economic development is destroying the Amazon. And what's destroying the Amazon and the Congo are the way that economic interests are entering in there and cutting down the rainforest, digging for oil, with tremendous mining operations, creating agribusiness, and obliging the people, the native people, the indigenous people, to get off the land. You remember a couple of years ago when George Bush, after 9/11, declared war on Iraq, he talked about that part of the world, plus North Korea, being an axis of evil. That was his way of expressing it. And he said, we have to destroy these areas because they're the ones that produce weapons of mass destruction, right? I'm not saying, whether Bush is good, bad, or evil, that's not the point, yeah? But that phrase came into being, weapons of mass destruction. In a new sense, the weapons of destruction in the world today, as well as the military ones, as well as bombs and guns and stuff like that, are now mining operations, oil operations, because they're the ones that are destroying native peoples in the Amazon and destroying the environment, the rainforest. They are massively interfering with the ecological balance of the world's climate. There you see the river, begins where I live, in Peru, goes for nearly 7,000 kilometers and ends in the Atlantic Ocean in Brazil, in a place called Belém, a huge river. It's navigable by transatlantic ships, transport, right up to a town called Iquitos in Peru. Big ships can go right up there. It's nurtured by more than 1,000 tributaries and shared by 9 different countries. We call it the Pan-Amazon space. Brazil is the biggest occupant with nearly 2/3 of the Amazon, and then smaller parts of it are here in Bolivia, Peru, Ecuador, Colombia, Venezuela, and the tiny 3 Guyanas in the Atlantic. There's an aerial view where the borders of countries, Brazil, Peru, Colombia, for example, come together in that particular space. There are 3 million people, it's not very much, that inhabit the area. And most of those people are newly arrived colonists that are entrepreneurs, adventurers, one thing or another. The original dwellers are quite small. The indigenous population of these ethnic groups are about 3 million. The population is 3 million, and there's nearly 400 ethnic groups, each with their own culture, their own history, and their own languages. 240 different languages being spoken. Languages of 50, what we call linguistic groups. And the most numerous are the Arawak, the Kalimuka, the Tupi, Guarani. There's a few slides there of the type of people that live in the Amazon and whose lives are now in danger and under pressure. So we as a church have started a network, a platform, as from 2 years ago, headed by a man from Brazil, Cardinal Hughes, Claudio Hughes, a very close friend of Pope Francis. And this network is to bring a new focus, a new beginning of the church to save the Amazon, and to save the lives of the people, to save the rainforest, to make a contribution to saving the world's climate. The work is to join up the different levels of activity, the missionaries that actually live and work in the Amazon, the churches of the different nations that share the Amazon, but also have a voice in civic areas like the United Nations, the International Court of Human Rights, and to bring the possibility of Amazonic leaders to say what they're suffering without intermediaries, so that pressure can be put upon their governments to stop the onslaught and to stop the abuse in the way mining operations and oil operations are doing the thing at the moment. We must have a new type of mining, a new type of oil exploration and exploitation. Care must be taken to respect in as much as possible the rainforest and the lives and lands of people. If not, the destruction continues to take place and everything gets worse. So this year we have been able, through CAFOD, and we wouldn't be able to do it without you. You are the main agency that collaborated with Red Pan. That's what we call the project, the church network for the Pan-Amazon, to bring the leaders of 13 conflictive places where people have been struggling most, and the leaders with a Christian formation and a Christian conscience, and bring them to the US, to Washington, D.C., to be able to participate in a public audience and say what they're living and their case to be tried, so that the Commission, in the name of the Organization of the American States, can say to the government of Brazil, to the government of Peru, you have got to change. So Christian love for Francis has these two elements. It's the love of God, but there's only one love of God, and the way you express the love of God is to love people and the world that we live in. So this is what CAFOD is doing, what the Pope wants and what the Pope says is the way of prayer and being Christian. To be a saint is to do justice, is to defend life, to go out of your way, to be merciful,